The knocking started at exactly 5:17 a.m. I know, because I'd been staring at my phone for the past hour, watching the minutes crawl by in that suffocating darkness that comes just before dawn. The kind of darkness that makes you feel like you're the only person awake in the entire world, drowning in bills you can't pay and decisions you can't make. The apartment was cold. It was always cold. The radiator had given up sometime in October, and my landlord had given up on me around the same time. I pulled the thin blanket tighter around my shoulders, my breath forming small clouds in the air. Outside, the city was still sleeping, or pretending to. In neighborhoods like mine, sleep was a luxury reserved for people who didn't have 3 jobs and a baby on the way. My fingers were cramping from holding the eviction notice I'd found taped to my door yesterday. 72 hours. That's all I had left before they threw me and my few belongings onto the street. I'd read it so many times the words had started to blur together, becoming just another incomprehensible obstacle in a life full of them. Then came the knocking, not the angry pounding of bill collectors, or the impatient rapping of my landlord. This was different, measured, deliberate. 3 steady knocks that somehow managed to sound both patient and utterly unyielding. I froze, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. Nobody came to this building at 5 a.m., unless they were running from something or looking for someone to hurt. I'd learned that in my 8 months here, in this building that smelled perpetually of cigarettes and desperation. The knocking came again, same rhythm, same terrifying patience. I stood slowly, my legs shaking, though whether from fear or the fact that I'd barely eaten in 2 days, I couldn't tell. The floorboards creaked beneath my bare feet as I crept toward the door, and I winced at every sound. The thin fabric of my oversized t-shirt, one of the few things I had left from my previous life, offered no protection against the cold or the fear crawling up my spine. Through the peephole, I could see nothing but darkness and the vague outline of a shoulder. An expensive shoulder, if fabric could be expensive. Even through the fisheye distortion of the peephole, I could tell the coat was worth more than everything I owned. "Who is it?" My voice came out smaller than I'd intended, barely more than a whisper. Silence. Then a voice, low and precise, with an accent that spoke of expensive schools and dangerous choices. "Miss Rivera, I need to speak with you about Carlos Martinez." The name hit me like a physical blow. Carlos. The man who'd promised me forever and left me with nothing but a baby growing inside me and debts I didn't know existed until he disappeared 6 months ago. The man I'd loved with the kind of desperate, stupid intensity that only 23-year-old girls who should know better are capable of. "I don't know where he is," I said, pressing my forehead against the cold door. "I haven't seen him since." "I know where he is, Miss Rivera." The voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath, the kind of steel that could cut through bone without changing tone. "That's not why I'm here. Please open the door. I'm not here to hurt you." Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, to hide, to do anything but open that door. But instinct doesn't pay overdue rent or buy food for an empty refrigerator. And something in that voice, some terrible certainty, made me understand that running wouldn't matter. This man, whoever he was, had found me, and men like that, men who knocked on doors at 5 a.m. with voices like silk-wrapped steel, always got what they came for. My hands trembled as I undid the chain lock, the deadbolt. The regular lock that barely worked anymore. The door swung open, and I found myself looking up, way up, at a man who seemed to absorb all the light in the hallway. He was tall, maybe 6'2" or 6'3", with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that looked black in the dim light. Everything about him was expensive. The charcoal cashmere coat, the suit underneath that probably cost more than my annual income, the Italian leather shoes that had no business being in a building like this. But it wasn't his clothes that made my breath catch. It was the way he stood, absolutely still, like a predator who'd learned long ago that he never needed to chase. Behind him, half hidden in the shadows near the stairwell, I could make out the shape of another man, bigger, broader, The kind of presence that existed purely to remind you that violence was always an option. The man at my door studied me with eyes that missed nothing. I watched them catalog everything. My bare feet on the freezing floor, the oversized shirt that hung off my increasingly thin frame, the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide anymore, the small swell of my belly that I instinctively tried to cover with my arms. "May I come in?" He didn't wait for an answer, just stepped forward with the kind of certainty that came from never being told no. I stumbled backward, and he closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. The apartment, which had always felt cramped and small, suddenly felt microscopic with him in it. He seemed to take up all the space, all the air, leaving none for me. He didn't sit, even though there was a worn couch nearby. Instead, he stood in the center of my tiny living room, looking around with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not disgust exactly, but something close to it. Or maybe pity. I wasn't sure which would be worse. "You're living like this," he said finally. And it wasn't a question. Hot shame flooded through me, mixing with anger. "What do you want? If Carlos owes you money, I don't have—" "Carlos owes me considerably more than money, Miss Rivera." He turned those dark eyes on me, and I felt pinned by them, like a butterfly on a collector's board. He stole from me, $300,000 to be precise. Money that belonged to people who don't forgive debts. The number was so absurd, so impossibly large, that I almost laughed. Instead, I felt my knees go weak. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." "I know." He pulled out his phone, not the regular kind, something sleeker, more secure-looking, and showed me a photograph. Carlos, smiling at the camera, his arm around a blonde woman I'd never seen before. They were on a beach somewhere tropical, drinks in hand, looking like people without a care in the world. He's in the Maldives. He's been there for 4 months, spending my money with his actual wife. The words hit me like separate punches. Actual wife. 4 months. Maldives. I must have made some sound, because suddenly the man's hand was on my elbow, steady and warm, guiding me into the chair I'd been clutching. The gentleness of the gesture was somehow more terrifying than violence would have been. "Breathe, Miss Rivera," he said quietly, and I realized I'd stopped. "I'm not his wife," I whispered, staring at the photo. At Carlos's smile, the same one he'd given me when he said he loved me, when he promised we'd build a life together. He said he couldn't marry me yet because of his immigration status, but that we would after you gave birth to his child, perhaps. The man's voice was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. Let me guess. He told you he needed to settle his business affairs first, that his family was complicated, that he needed to keep you secret to protect you. Each word was a knife, cutting through every lie I'd told myself, every excuse I'd made. I nodded, unable to speak past the growing lump in my throat. The man crouched down so we were at eye level, and this close, I could see his eyes weren't black at all. They were a deep brown, almost amber in certain lights. There was a scar, thin and white, cutting through his left eyebrow. The faint smell of expensive cologne and something else, gun oil maybe, or just the metallic scent of danger, surrounded him. "My name is Alessandro Vittorio," he said, each syllable precise and deliberate. "And Carlos Martinez made a very serious mistake when he decided to steal from my family. Family." The word hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning I was too afraid to fully contemplate. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat, thunderous and panicked. "I don't have his money," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "I don't have anything. I can see that." His eyes dropped briefly to my stomach, then back to my face. "But you have something Carlos values, even if he's currently too foolish to realize it. You're carrying his child." The way he said it made it sound like a chess piece rather than a baby, a bargaining chip. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. Alessandro Vittorio stood, towering over me again, and pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. He placed it on the coffee table between us. Expensive paper, thick and cream-colored, the kind that promised either salvation or damnation. "Carlos destroyed something that belonged to me," he said, his voice carrying that same terrible gentleness. More than money. He betrayed a trust, broke an oath. In my world, Miss Rivera, such things require recompense. I stared at the envelope, unable to look away. What's in there? A choice. He moved toward the door, and I felt my lungs expand again, able to breathe properly for the first time since he'd entered. But he paused with his hand on the knob, turning back to look at me with an expression I couldn't read. I was married until yesterday afternoon. 15 years. She decided my lifestyle was too dangerous, too uncertain. She took half of everything I own and left me with divorce papers and an empty house. I didn't understand why he was telling me this. What his divorce had to do with me or Carlos or any of this. I'm offering you a solution to both our problems, he continued. The details are in the envelope. You have until noon tomorrow to decide. After that, he shrugged, the gesture somehow more threatening than any explicit threat could be. After that, I'll be forced to extract my payment from Carlos by other means, and his child, your child, will grow up knowing their father died because he was a thief and a coward. Wait. I started to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. He opened the door, and I could see the other man still waiting in the hallway, patient as a statue. Read the proposal, Miss Rivera. Consider it carefully. I'll return tomorrow at noon for your answer. Then he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of his cologne and the envelope on my coffee table, glowing white in the growing dawn light like a promise or a curse. My hands shook as I reached for it, broke the wax seal, an actual wax seal, dark red with an embossed V, and pulled out the papers inside. The words swam before my eyes at first, too shocking to fully comprehend, but slowly, horribly, they began to make sense. A marriage contract, 1 year, complete financial security in exchange for becoming Alessandro Vittorio's wife. His public wife, his visible wife, the one who would accompany him to events and live in his home and help him maintain the image of stability his business required. And at the bottom, in that same precise handwriting I'd seen on the envelope, your child will want for nothing. Neither will you. All I ask is your time and your discretion. The sun was starting to rise outside my window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene given what had just happened. I sat in my freezing apartment, holding a contract that promised to solve every one of my problems, and realized that I'd just met the most dangerous man I'd ever encounter, and he'd left me no real choice at all. I didn't sleep. How could I? The envelope sat on my coffee table like a living thing, pulsing with possibility and threat in equal measure. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alessandro Vittorio's face, that careful neutrality that somehow communicated more than any expression could. The way his eyes had lingered on my stomach, calculating, assessing. By the time the sun fully rose, I'd read the contract so many times I could recite it. The terms were simultaneously generous and terrifying. 1 year as his wife, public appearances as needed, residence in his home, complete financial support, not just for me, but for the baby. Medical care, education, a trust fund that would ensure my child never knew poverty the way I had, and in exchange, my freedom, my autonomy. 12 months of my life belonging to a man who operated in shadows and spoke of recompense like it was a normal thing to extract from human beings. There was a section about discretion that made my blood run cold. I would not discuss his business. I would not ask questions about his associates. I would not contact law enforcement under any circumstances. Violation of these terms would result in immediate termination of the agreement and forfeiture of all benefits. I wondered what termination meant in Alessandro Vittorio's world. Something told me it wasn't just a polite handshake and a goodbye. At 8 a.m., I forced myself to shower in water that ran lukewarm at best. The bathroom mirror was cracked, splitting my reflection into fragments. A tired girl with dark circles under her eyes, a swollen belly she hadn't asked for, a future she couldn't see clearly no matter how hard she tried. I dressed in my only decent outfit. Black pants that were getting tight around the waist, and a cream-colored blouse I'd bought for job interviews that never went anywhere. My hands trembled as I buttoned it, and I had to start over twice. I needed to think. I needed advice. But who could I possibly ask? My mother had died when I was 19, and my father had made it clear that getting pregnant by a man who disappeared made me foolish and unworthy of his help. My friends, the few I'd had drifted away when Carlos isolated me, convincing me that we only needed each other. So I did what I always did when the walls of my apartment became too suffocating. I went to the diner. Rosie's Diner was a 24-hour institution 3 blocks from my building, the kind of place where the coffee was always hot and nobody asked questions about why you were sitting alone at a booth for hours with a single cup you couldn't afford to refill. I'd worked there briefly, before my morning sickness got so bad they'd had to let me go. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and the familiar smell of grease and coffee wrapped around me like a blanket. It was early enough that the place was nearly empty. Just a couple of truck drivers at the counter, and old Mr. Chen in his usual corner booth, reading a Chinese newspaper. "Mija!" Rosie herself appeared from the kitchen, her round face breaking into a smile that dimmed when she got a good look at me. You look terrible. Sit. I'll bring you something." I slid into a booth by the window, the cracked vinyl familiar against my legs. Outside, the city was waking up properly now. People hurrying to jobs, to lives, to purposes I couldn't fathom. Did any of them know what it was like to have their entire existence reduced to a choice between 2 impossible options? Rosie returned with eggs, toast, and orange juice I definitely couldn't pay for. "Don't argue," she said firmly when I opened my mouth. "You're eating for 2, and you look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." She wasn't wrong. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, my mind replaying the morning's events on an endless loop. Alessandro Vittorio's voice, cultured and dangerous. The photograph of Carlos, smiling on a beach while I froze in an apartment that wasn't even mine anymore. The contract that promised everything and demanded only my soul in return. "Boy trouble?" Rosie asked, sliding into the booth across from me with her own coffee. I almost laughed. "You could say that. The father finally show up?" "No." I pushed eggs around my plate. Someone else did. Someone who wants to help, I think, but I don't know if I can trust him. Rosie was quiet for a moment, studying me with eyes that had seen too much of life to be easily fooled. "This help. It comes with strings, more like chains," I whispered. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her palm was warm, calloused from decades of hard work. "Listen to me, Mija. I've been where you are. Pregnant, alone, scared out of my mind. And I've learned something about help. It always costs something. The question isn't whether there are strings. It's whether what you're getting is worth what you're giving up." "What if I don't know what I'm giving up?" My voice cracked. "What if I can't see all the ways this could go wrong?" "Then you trust your gut." She squeezed my hand. "What does your gut tell you about this man?" I thought about Alessandro Vittorio, the way he'd looked at my poverty with something that might have been pity, the gentleness in his voice when he told me to breathe. The absolute certainty that he was capable of terrible things, and that those things wouldn't bother him if he deemed them necessary. "It tells me he's dangerous," I said. "But also that he meant what he said. He'll take care of me. The baby. He'll keep his word. And the father? This Carlos?" I felt my jaw tighten. "Carlos is in the Maldives with his real wife spending money he stole." Rosie's expression darkened. "Then Carlos can rot. The question is what you want, Sophia. Not what you're afraid of, not what you think you deserve. What do you actually want?" I looked down at my stomach, at the small swell that would grow into a person who would depend on me for everything. A person who deserved better than cold apartments and empty refrigerators and a mother who was too proud to accept help from dangerous men. "I want my baby to be safe," I whispered. "I want them to have chances I never had. My voice broke. "I want to stop being so scared all the time." Rosie nodded slowly. "Then you know what you have to do." But did I? Could I really tie myself to a man I didn't know, whose business was clearly illegal, whose world operated by rules I couldn't begin to understand? Could I walk into that darkness willingly, even if it meant my child would have light? I left the diner at 10:30, Rosie's words echoing in my head. The walk back to my apartment felt both too long and too short. I needed more time to think, but I also needed this decision to be over. one way or another. The building looked even more decrepit in daylight. Peeling paint, broken windows on the third floor that had been broken since I moved in, graffiti on the walls that management had long since given up trying to remove. This was what I could offer my child on my own. This was the best I could do. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand on the railing that wobbled with each step. On the second-floor landing, I passed Mrs. Kowalski, who'd lived here for 30 years and had stories about when this building was respectable. She looked at me with rheumy eyes and shook her head. "You should leave while you can, girl," she said in her thick accent. "This place, it's dying, and it takes everyone with it." I didn't have the energy to respond. I just nodded and kept climbing. My apartment door was closed, locked, exactly as I'd left it. But something felt different, wrong. I stood in the hallway, key in hand, trying to identify what had changed. Then I smelled it. Cigarette smoke. Not the stale smell that permeated the building, but fresh smoke coming from under my door. My heart started to race. I'd locked the door. I was sure of it. But someone was inside my apartment, smoking, waiting. For a wild moment, I considered running. Down the stairs, out of the building, away from whatever was waiting on the other side of that door. But where would I go? And whoever was in there had already proven they could get past my locks. I turned the key with shaking hands and pushed the door open. Two men I'd never seen before sat in my living room like they owned it. One was on my couch, feet up on the coffee table, right on top of Alessandro's envelope, smoking a cigarette and looking at me with cold amusement. The other stood by the window, bigger and meaner looking, with scars on his knuckles that suggested violence was a regular part of his job description. "Miss Rivera," the one on the couch said, grinding his cigarette out on my table and leaving a burn mark. "We need to have a conversation about your boyfriend." "I don't have a boyfriend," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And you need to leave. Now." The bigger one laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "We'll leave when we're ready. See, Carlos Martinez owes our boss money, a lot of money, and we've been looking for him for 6 months. Imagine our surprise when we find out he's got a pregnant girlfriend living in a shithole in Queens." "I don't know where he is," I said, backing toward the still open door. "I haven't seen him." "We know," the one on the couch interrupted. He stood, and I could see he was wearing a shoulder holster, the gun inside it clearly visible. "We know you're just the stupid girl he knocked up and abandoned, but see, here's the thing. You're still useful to us." The bigger one moved toward the door, cutting off my escape route. My breath caught in my throat. "We're going to make a video," the smoker continued, pulling out his phone. "You're going to cry real pretty and beg Carlos to come back and make things right. You're going to tell him that if he doesn't return our money, we're going to hurt you and that baby you're carrying. And then we're going to send that video to every contact Carlos ever had until he shows his face. No." The word came out stronger than I felt. "No, I won't do that." The bigger one grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, and shoved me toward the couch. I stumbled, barely catching myself on the armrest. Pain shot through my wrist. "You don't have a choice, sweetheart," the smoker said, raising his phone. "Now, let's see some tears." The door, which I'd left open in my panic, swung wider. Alessandro Vittorio stood in the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He wasn't alone. The man I'd seen in the hallway this morning was with him, along with 2 others, all wearing the same dark suits, all radiating the same barely contained violence. But it was Alessandro who commanded the room. He stood absolutely still, his eyes moving from the burn mark on my table to the man with the phone to the bigger one's hand still gripping my arm. "Let her go," he said quietly. Too quietly. The smoker's face had gone pale. "Mr. Vittorio, we didn't know. Let her go." Each word was precisely enunciated, carrying a weight that made the bigger man release my arm immediately. I stumbled away from both of them, toward Alessandro, though I didn't consciously decide to move. "We were just—" the smoker started. "You were just leaving." Alessandro's voice remained calm, conversational even. "And you're going to tell Victor Kozlov that Sofia Rivera is under my protection now, that any attempt to contact her, threaten her, or use her in his ridiculous schemes will be considered a declaration of war. Are we clear? The two men practically fell over each other getting to the door. The bigger one paused just long enough to mutter, "Yes, Mr. Vittorio, crystal clear." Then they were gone, and the apartment was silent except for my ragged breathing. Alessandro crossed the room to me in 3 strides. His hands, warm, steady, cupped my face, tilting it up so he could examine me. "Did they hurt you?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. His thumb brushed across my cheek, and I realized I was crying. When had I started crying? "Your wrist," he said, his voice tight. "Let me see." I held out my arm, and he examined it with gentle precision, his fingers probing carefully. "Bruised, not broken," he said. Then he looked up at me, and something in his eyes made my breath catch. "This is what your life will look like if you refuse my offer, Sophia. Men like Kozlov, men like Carlos's other creditors, they'll keep coming. They'll use you until there's nothing left to use. Is that what you want?" "No," I whispered. "Then marry me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really a demand. It was just a statement of fact, the only logical conclusion to an impossible situation. "Marry me, and I'll make sure no one ever touches you again. You and your child will be untouchable, protected, safe." I looked around my apartment, at the burn mark on my table, at the door that didn't keep anyone out, at the eviction notice still sitting where I'd left it. Then I looked at Alessandro Vittorio, at this dangerous, powerful man who'd somehow appointed himself my protector. "Okay," I heard myself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. "Good," he said softly. "Pack whatever you want to keep. You're leaving with me. Now." "Now?" I looked around wildly. "But I thought, noon, you said—" "That was before Kozlov's men broke into your home and threatened you." His voice hardened. "You're not spending another second in this place. Marco," he gestured to one of the men who'd come with him, "will help you pack. 10 minutes. Whatever doesn't fit, we'll replace." It should have felt like I was being kidnapped. Rushed, pressured, given no real choice, but instead, as I threw my few belongings into the same duffel bag I'd brought when I first moved in, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe I was trading one cage for another. But at least this cage came with protection, with safety, with a man who'd looked at my bruised wrist and gotten an expression in his eyes that promised retribution. I was closing the duffel when Alessandro appeared in my doorway, holding something. The envelope. The contract. "You'll need to sign this," he said. "My lawyer will witness it." I took the pen he offered and signed my name, Sophia Maria Rivera, on the line indicated. My handwriting looked shaky, uncertain. His, when he signed on the second line, was bold and confident. Mr. and Mrs. Alessandro Vittorio. God help me. The car waiting downstairs was nothing like I'd imagined a car could be. Sleek, black, with windows so darkly tinted I couldn't see inside until Marco opened the door for me. The interior smelled of leather and luxury, and when I slid across the seat, real leather, butter-soft and warm, I felt like I'd entered another dimension entirely. Alessandro settled in beside me, maintaining a careful distance that somehow felt more intimate than if he'd sat close. He pulled out one of his phones. I counted 3 different devices in his coat pocket, and began typing rapidly, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet cabin. "My home," he said, without looking up. "Well, one of them. The penthouse in Manhattan. It's the most secure. Most secure. As if security was something measured in degrees, something you could quantify and optimize. I supposed in his world it was. The car glided through Queens, leaving behind the broken sidewalks and struggling bodegas that had been my entire universe for months. We crossed into Manhattan, and the city transformed. Gleaming towers reached toward a sky that seemed bluer here, cleaner. People on these streets walked with purpose and confidence, their clothes expensive, their problems probably very different from mine. I pressed my hand against my stomach, feeling the slight flutter that had become familiar over the past few weeks. "Hey, baby," I whispered, too quietly for Alessandro to hear. "I hope I'm doing the right thing. I hope you'll forgive me if I'm not." The car pulled up to a building that looked like it belonged in a magazine. All glass and steel, with a doorman in an actual uniform who snapped to attention when he saw our vehicle. Marco opened my door, and I stepped out onto a sidewalk so clean it looked freshly washed. "Mr. Vittorio," the doorman said, his tone deferential. "Welcome home, sir." Alessandro's hand found the small of my back, guiding me forward. The touch was light, impersonal, but it sent electricity shooting up my spine anyway. "This is my wife, Sophia," he said, and I heard heads turn in the lobby. "She's to have full access to the building. Her word is my word." Wife. The word hung in the air, impossible and real all at once. The lobby was all marble and modern art, with a security desk manned by 2 men who watched us with sharp, assessing eyes. Not regular security guards. These men had the same careful stillness as Marco, the same awareness that spoke of violence held carefully in check. The elevator was private, requiring a key card that Alessandro produced from his wallet. We rode up in silence, just the 2 of us now, Marco having stayed behind in the lobby. The numbers climbed, 20, 30, 40. Higher than I'd ever been in my life. The doors opened directly into an apartment that made my breath catch. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, the trees just beginning to show their autumn colors. The space was enormous, all clean lines and expensive furniture. Art on the walls that I suspected was original. Everything was in shades of cream and gray and black, sophisticated and intimidating in equal measure. "The master bedroom is through there," Alessandro said, pointing to a hallway on the left. "You'll have your own bathroom, walk-in closet. There's also a guest room being converted into a nursery. I had my assistant start the process this morning." This morning. He'd been so confident I would say yes that he'd started preparing before I'd even signed the contract. "I took the liberty of having some clothes delivered," he continued, walking toward the kitchen. A massive space with appliances I didn't recognize. "They're in the closet. If anything doesn't fit or isn't to your taste, we'll replace it. You bought me clothes." The words came out strangled. "How did you even know my size?" He gave me a look that suggested the question was naive. "I know everything about you, Sophia. Your dress size, your shoe size, your medical history, your bank account balance, or lack thereof. I don't make decisions without information." The casual invasion of my privacy should have made me angry. Instead, I just felt tired. "Of course you do." Something in my tone made him pause. He set down the phone he'd been about to check and actually looked at me. Really looked at me, for the first time since we'd entered the apartment. "You're exhausted," he said. And it wasn't a question. "When did you last sleep?" "I don't know. Yesterday? The day before?" Time had become fluid, meaningless. He moved toward me, and I instinctively stepped back. He stopped immediately, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you, Sophia. I need you to understand that. Whatever else I am, whatever you've heard or will hear about me, I don't hurt women. I don't hurt children. Those are lines I don't cross. You hurt people, though." I wasn't sure why I said it, why I was poking at this dangerous man. Maybe I needed to know exactly what I'd gotten myself into. "Yes," he said simply. "I hurt people who deserve it, people who steal from me, betray me, threaten what's mine. But you're not those people. You're—" He stopped, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You're under my protection now. That means something in my world. It means everything. What's mine?" The possessiveness in those words should have terrified me. Instead, after months of being nothing to anyone, being claimed felt almost like relief. "I should show you the bedroom," he said, shifting back to business. "You need rest. We have a dinner tonight at 8. Business associates I need you to meet. But until then, sleep. Eat. There's food in the refrigerator, or I can have something brought up. Tonight?" I followed him down the hallway, my mind reeling. "But shouldn't we wait?" He pushed open a door, revealing a bedroom larger than my entire previous apartment. A massive bed dominated the space, covered in what looked like silk sheets. Word is already spreading that I've taken a new wife. Every moment we delay in making a public appearance, my enemies will see as weakness. We need to be seen together. Soon. Preferably tonight. The bedroom had the same floor-to-ceiling windows as the living room, offering a view that made my knees weak. I could see the entire park from here. Could see the city spreading out in all directions like a promise or a threat. "The closet is through there," Alessandro said, gesturing to another door. "Bathroom is there. If you need anything, there's an intercom system. Just press the button marked main and someone will respond. Someone, not him. Someone whose job was to respond to needs and requests from the wife of Alessandro Vittorio. What if I want to leave? The question escaped before I could stop it. What if I want to go outside, take a walk? His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Then Marco or one of the other guards will accompany you. You don't go anywhere alone, Sophia. Not anymore, so I'm a prisoner. I'd known this would be part of the deal, but hearing it stated so baldly still hurt. You're protected, he corrected. There's a difference. Kozlov's men proved why this is necessary. There are others like them, worse than them. People who would use you to get to me, now that you're my wife. I won't allow that. He moved to leave, then paused in the doorway. The contract specified 1 year, Sophia. 12 months. After that, if you want to leave, you can. I'll set you up somewhere safe. Make sure you and the child are provided for. But for that year, you live by my rules. You accept my protection. You play the role we've agreed to. Are we clear? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Good. Rest now. I'll wake you at 6 so you have time to prepare for dinner. Then he was gone, and I was alone in a bedroom that cost more than I'd earn in a lifetime, looking out at a view that seemed to belong to someone else's life entirely. I should have felt grateful, safe, protected, just as he'd promised. Instead, I felt like I'd made a deal with the devil and was only now beginning to understand the price. I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to gentle knocking and the smell of food. The light outside had changed, golden hour, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. I sat up groggily, disoriented, until I remembered where I was. The knocking came again. Miss Rivera? A woman's voice, accented, Italian maybe. Mr. Vittorio asked me to bring you food and help you prepare for this evening. I opened the door to find a woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed, holding a tray with soup, bread, and what looked like fresh fruit. Her smile was warm but professional. I'm Maria, she said, moving past me to set the tray on a small table by the window. I've worked for Mr. Vittorio for 12 years. I'll be helping you adjust to your new life here. New life. As if I could just shed the old one like a coat that didn't fit anymore. I'm not very hungry, I started to say, but Maria was already shaking her head. You need to eat. For the baby. Mr. Vittorio was very specific about this. And you need to look your best tonight. There will be many eyes on you, many questions about who you are and where you came from. She moved to the closet and began pulling out dresses. He chose this one, she said, holding up a deep emerald silk that probably cost more than my car used to. He has excellent taste. It will complement your skin tone beautifully. I ate the soup mechanically, while Maria laid out clothes, shoes, jewelry. She talked the entire time about the building, about Alessandro's preferences, about what would be expected of me at dinner. The important thing is to stay close to him, she said, helping me into the dress an hour later. Don't wander off, don't accept drinks from anyone else, don't discuss his business, just smile, be gracious, and let him do the talking. The dress fit perfectly, skimming over my small bump in a way that made it less obvious. Maria did my makeup, subtle but polished, and styled my hair into soft waves that made me look like someone else entirely, someone who belonged in penthouses and expensive restaurants. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Alessandro was waiting in the living room when I emerged, and the way his eyes swept over me made heat flood my cheeks. He'd changed into a different suit, this one charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, and looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. Beautiful, he said simply, offering his arm. Are you ready? No, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for any of this. Not the dress, not the penthouse, not the role I was about to play. But I took his arm anyway, felt the solid strength of him beneath the expensive fabric, and nodded. Yes, I lied. I'm ready. The restaurant was called Mafia, and even I, with my limited knowledge of fancy dining, had heard of it. 2 Michelin stars, 6-month waiting list. The kind of place where people proposed and celebrated anniversaries and made business deals worth millions. We were seated immediately, naturally, at the best table in the house, a corner booth with a view of the dining room and both exits. Alessandro positioned himself so his back was to the wall, and I realized this was habit, instinct. Always watching. Always ready. Within minutes, people began approaching our table. Men in expensive suits who shook Alessandro's hand and eyed me with curiosity. Women dripping in diamonds who air-kissed his cheeks and sized me up like competition. "This is my wife, Sophia," Alessandro said, again and again, his hand possessive on mine each time. "We were married this morning." The reactions varied. Surprise, skepticism. In a few cases, barely concealed hostility. But no one dared question him directly. They just smiled their practiced smiles and offered their congratulations and retreated to their own tables where I could feel them watching, whispering. "Breathe," Alessandro murmured in my ear during a brief moment alone. "You're doing well." "They all think I'm a gold digger," I whispered back. "Some cheap girl who trapped you." His hand tightened on mine. "Let them think what they want. Their opinions are irrelevant, but they weren't irrelevant to me. I could feel the weight of their judgment, their assumption that I was nothing more than a pretty face who'd gotten pregnant and lucked into a fortune. If only they knew the truth was so much more complicated. Dinner arrived. I'd let Alessandro order for me, too overwhelmed to make decisions, and I picked at my food while conversation swirled around us. Business talk, carefully coded, references to shipments and territories and arrangements that sounded legitimate until you paid attention to what wasn't being said. I was finishing my second glass of water when a woman approached our table, late 30s, stunning in a way that took effort and money, wearing a dress that probably cost more than a car. She walked with the confidence of someone used to getting what she wanted. "Alessandro," she purred, completely ignoring me. I heard rumors, but I had to see for myself. "Married? Again? Already?" Alessandro's expression went carefully blank. "Veronica, this is my wife, Sophia." Veronica finally deigned to look at me, and the dismissal in her eyes was immediate and cutting. "How sweet. Tell me, dear, how long have you two known each other?" "Long enough," Alessandro said, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. "Long enough to know about his late-night meetings? His business trips that last for weeks? His tendency to—" She leaned in conspiratorially, her perfume cloying and overwhelming. "Collect broken things and try to fix them?" "Veronica." There was steel in Alessandro's voice now, sharp enough to cut. "Walk away. Now." Something dangerous flashed in her eyes, but she straightened, that false smile back in place. "Of course. Congratulations on your marriage, darling. I'm sure it will be just as successful as the last one." She left, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. "Who was she?" I asked when I could speak again. Alessandro was quiet for a long moment. "My ex-wife's sister," he finally said. "She never approved of me, never thought I was good enough for her family." "She's not wrong, but that doesn't mean I have to listen to her poison." His ex-wife's sister, God. What had I walked into? We left the restaurant shortly after, Alessandro's hand never leaving the small of my back as we navigated through the dining room. I could feel eyes following us, whispers trailing in our wake. In the car, Alessandro made several phone calls in rapid Italian, his tone clipped and authoritative. I stared out the window at the city lights, at all the people living normal lives with normal problems, and wondered if I'd ever feel normal again. "You did well tonight," Alessandro said when he finally ended his last call. "I know it wasn't easy." "Everyone thinks I'm just some girl after your money," I said, still looking out the window. "Everyone thinks what I want them to think," he corrected, "which is that you're my wife and therefore untouchable. That's all that matters." Back at the penthouse, exhaustion crashed over me like a wave. Alessandro walked me to my bedroom door, and for a moment, we stood there in awkward silence. Tomorrow we'll go to my lawyer to make everything official in terms of your status, finances, medical coverage, he said, and we need to discuss security protocols more thoroughly. But tonight, rest. Alessandro? I caught his arm before he could leave. Thank you. For today. For getting rid of those men. For all of it. Something softened in his expression. You're my wife now, Sophia. That means something to me. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be another long day. I watched him walk away down the hallway, toward what I assumed was his own bedroom. Separate rooms, separate lives, connected only by a contract and circumstances neither of us had fully chosen. I changed into the silk pajamas Maria had left out, because apparently I wore silk now, and climbed into bed. The sheets were cool and smooth, the mattress more comfortable than anything I'd ever experienced. But as I lay there in the darkness, looking out at the city lights that never truly went dark, I couldn't help but wonder, had I escaped one trap only to walk willingly into another? And which man was more dangerous? The one who'd abandoned me, or the one who'd claimed me? The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of impossible adjustments. Maria became my constant companion, teaching me things I'd never imagined I'd need to know. How to navigate a formal dinner with 6 different forks, which designers Alessandro preferred. How to smile through conversations with people who looked down on me while maintaining the dignity befitting Mrs. Vittorio. How to move through a room full of dangerous men without showing fear. Posture, Mrs. Vittorio, she'd say, gently correcting the way I held myself. You represent him now. Every gesture, every word, it all reflects on Mr. Vittorio. The pressure was suffocating, but slowly, impossibly, I began to adapt. Alessandro was gone most days, leaving before I woke and returning after I'd gone to bed. Our interactions were brief, professional. He'd ask about my doctor's appointments. He'd arrange for me to see the best obstetrician in Manhattan, naturally. He'd inquire if I needed anything. He'd remind me of upcoming events where my presence was required. But he never touched me beyond what was necessary for appearances, never asked about my past beyond what was relevant to our arrangement, kept a careful, respectful distance that should have felt like relief, but instead felt like loneliness. The penthouse, for all its luxury, felt like a beautiful cage. I could go to the gym on the building's 40th floor, but only with Marco hovering nearby. I could shop, but only at approved stores with a guard trailing behind. I could walk in Central Park, but never alone, never without the constant awareness that I was being watched, protected, controlled. My body changed rapidly. At 18 weeks now, the baby was unmistakable. I'd felt the first real kicks 3 days ago, lying alone in that massive bed, and had cried because I had no one to share it with. Carlos had abandoned me. Alessandro was a stranger, and my child was growing inside me, about to be born into a world I didn't understand. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything shifted. I was in the nursery, a room that had been transformed by designers into something out of a magazine, all soft grays and whites with hand-painted murals of clouds and stars, when I heard voices from the living room. Loud voices, Alessandro's, tight with barely controlled anger, and another man's, equally furious. You can't be serious, the other man was saying. You married some random girl you met 3 weeks ago? What the hell were you thinking? My personal life is none of your concern, Matteo. The hell it isn't. You're my brother, Alessandro, and you're acting crazy. Dad would be... Dad is dead. Alessandro's voice went deadly quiet. And I don't answer to you about my choices. Brother. Alessandro had a brother. He'd never mentioned family, never given any indication that he had people who cared about what he did. I should have stayed in the nursery, should have given them privacy, but something drew me forward until I was standing in the hallway where I could see them without being seen. Matteo was younger than Alessandro, maybe late 20s, with the same dark hair but lighter eyes. He was pacing the living room like a caged animal, his expensive suit rumpled like he'd been wearing it for days. 3 weeks, Matteo said again. You've known this girl for 3 weeks, and she's already pregnant. The child isn't mine. Alessandro poured himself a drink, his movements controlled despite the tension radiating from him. She was pregnant when we married. The father is Carlos Martinez. Mateo froze. Carlos, the kid who robbed us? The one you've been hunting for 6 months? Yes. So this is revenge. Mateo's laugh was bitter. You married his pregnant girlfriend for revenge. That's insane, even for you. It's not revenge. Alessandro drank, his eyes distant. It's complicated. Complicated. Mateo moved closer to his brother, lowering his voice, but I could still hear him. Or is this about Isabella? About proving you can move on, have a family, be normal? Don't. The warning in Alessandro's voice was clear. Don't bring her into this. She's already in this. Everything you've done since the divorce has been about her. The late nights, the obsessive work, and now this, marrying a stranger, playing house with someone else's baby. You're not fooling anyone, Alessandro. Least of all yourself. I pressed my hand against my stomach, feeling the baby move, and something sharp twisted in my chest. Was that all I was? A replacement? A way for Alessandro to fill the void his ex-wife had left? Sofia is my wife, Alessandro said, his voice steady but strained. That's all you need to know. She's under my protection, and anyone who threatens her threatens me. Including you, if you continue down this path. I'm trying to protect you, Mateo said, and for the first time, I heard genuine concern in his voice. From yourself. From whatever self-destructive thing you think you're doing. You can't save her, Alessandro. You can't save everyone. Get out. Alessandro, get out. The shout made me jump, made my heart race. I'd never heard Alessandro raise his voice, never seen the careful control slip. I don't need your concern or your judgment. I need you to do your job and leave my personal life alone. Silence. Then footsteps. Mateo walking toward the elevator, his shoulders slumped into feet. I retreated quickly to the nursery, my mind racing. Alessandro had married me to replace his ex-wife, to prove something, to fill a void. Not because he'd wanted to help me, not because he'd felt any genuine connection, but because I was convenient, available, useful. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing my distress. I'm sorry, I whispered, sitting in the rocking chair the designers had placed by the window. I'm so sorry I brought you into this mess. I don't know how long I sat there before Alessandro found me. The sun had set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, and I was just staring out at the city, feeling more alone than I had in that freezing apartment in Queens. Sofia. His voice was quiet, controlled again. The mask back in place. I didn't know you were home. I heard. I said, not looking at him. Your brother. What he said about Isabella, about why you really married me. He was silent for a long moment. Then he moved into the room, sitting in the chair across from me. In the fading light, his face was all shadows and sharp angles. Mateo doesn't know what he's talking about, he said finally. Doesn't he? I turned to face him. Was I just convenient, Alessandro? A way to prove you'd moved on? Someone else's baby to raise so you could play at being the family man your ex-wife wanted? No. The word was sharp, definitive, then softer. Not entirely. The honesty surprised me. I'd expected denials, deflection. Not this raw admission. I won't lie to you, Sofia. When I first learned about you, about your situation with Carlos, yes, there was an element of revenge. He'd stolen from me, betrayed my trust. Taking something he valued seemed appropriate. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. But that's not why I came back. That's not why I gave you the contract. Then why? My voice cracked. Why did you really do this? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because when I saw you in that apartment, freezing and alone and still trying so hard to be strong, you reminded me of someone, not Isabella, my mother. I hadn't expected that. Your mother? She was 17 when she got pregnant with me. Unmarried, poor, from a village in Sicily where that kind of thing meant shame for your entire family. His voice went distant, remembering. My father, my biological father, was from a wealthy family. He wanted nothing to do with her, left her with nothing but promises he never intended to keep. The parallel wasn't lost on me. What happened to her? She survived. Barely. Worked herself to death trying to give me a decent life. She was 34 when she died, but she looked 60, worn down by poverty and men who used her, and a world that punished her for a choice she'd made at 17. He looked at me then, and I saw something raw in his eyes. When I saw what you were facing, I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let another woman suffer like my mother did, not when I had the power to prevent it. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't bother wiping them away. So I'm your penance. Your way of making up for not being able to save her. Maybe. He stood, moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Or maybe I saw a woman who deserved better than what she'd been given, and I had the means to provide it. Does the motivation really matter, Sophia? You have security. Safety. Your child will have everything mine didn't. Everything except a father who actually wants them, I said bitterly. He turned sharply. I will be a father to your child. That was part of our agreement. I will provide, protect, raise them as my own. They will have my name, my resources, my love. What more could they need? The truth. I stood, my hands clenched into fists. They'll need to know the truth, that their real father abandoned them, that their mother married a stranger out of desperation, that this whole thing is built on lies and convenience and survival. Alessandro interrupted, crossing the room until he was standing in front of me. It's built on survival, Sophia, on two people who needed something from each other and made a deal. There's no shame in that, isn't there? I looked up at him. This man I'd tied my life to, this stranger I was supposed to trust with my child's future. Don't you ever wish it could be different? Real? Something flickered across his face. Longing, maybe, or regret. Every day, he said quietly. I wish every day that I could be normal. Have a normal marriage, a normal family, a normal life, but I'm not normal, Sophia. I'm a man who operates in shadows and makes money from things polite society pretends don't exist. He gestured between us. This is the best I can offer, the best I can be. The baby kicked then, hard enough that I gasped and pressed my hand to my stomach. Alessandro's eyes dropped immediately to where my hand rested, and something in his expression shifted. May I? He asked, his voice uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. I nodded, and he placed his hand next to mine, large and warm against the silk of my dress. We stood like that for a long moment, waiting. Then the baby kicked again, right against his palm, and I watched wonder bloom across his face. Strong, he murmured, like their mother. I'm not strong, I said, tears falling again. I'm terrified, all the time. I don't know how to be your wife, how to raise a baby in this world, how to... Sophia. He cupped my face with his free hand, forcing me to look at him. You survived months alone, pregnant, with nothing. You've adapted to a life completely foreign to you in 3 weeks. You faced down Kozlov's men without breaking. You are the strongest person I know. Then why do I feel like I'm drowning? Because strength doesn't mean you don't struggle. It means you keep going despite it. His thumb brushed away my tears. And you're not alone anymore. You have me. For better or worse, for the next year, you have me. The next year. The reminder was like cold water. This wasn't forever. This wasn't real. In 9 months, I'd give birth, and in 12 months, I'd be free to leave. This was temporary, a business arrangement with an expiration date. But standing there with his hand on my stomach, feeling my baby kick against his palm, it felt terrifyingly real. I should let you rest, Alessandro said, stepping back, the moment broken. You've had an emotional day. Wait. I caught his hand. Stay, just for a few minutes, please. I don't want to be alone right now. He hesitated, and I could see the war playing out behind his eyes, the careful distance he maintained, the professional boundaries he'd established. But then he nodded and sat back down, and I returned to the rocking chair, and we sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky. Tell me about her, I said finally. Your mother. What was she like? And to my surprise, he did. He told me about Maria Vittorio. about her laugh that could light up a room, and her hands that were always working, always trying to make something from nothing, about how she'd sung to him in Italian, old songs from her village, about how she'd died when he was 16, leaving him alone in a world that had never been kind to either of them. The man who raised me after she died, Antonio Vittorio. He wasn't my biological father, but he gave me his name, his business, his world. Alessandro's voice was soft in the darkness. He taught me how to survive, how to thrive, how to never let anyone make me feel small again. Everything I am, good and bad, comes from him. Do you miss him? Every day. He died 5 years ago. Heart attack, sudden and brutal. He was the only real father I ever knew. He looked at me then. That's why I meant what I said, Sophia. I will be a father to your child. I know what it's like to grow up without one, to feel that absence. I won't let your baby feel that. The sincerity in his voice broke something open in my chest. Thank you, I whispered. We sat in silence until I started to doze, my body finally surrendering to exhaustion. I felt Alessandro lift me. When had he gotten so close? And carry me to my bedroom. Felt him lay me gently on the bed, pull the covers over me. Sleep, Sophia, he murmured, and I felt his lips brush my forehead. You're safe here, I promise. I wanted to tell him that safety wasn't enough, that I wanted more. Connection, honesty, maybe even love someday, but sleep was already pulling me under, and the words dissolved before I could form them. When I woke the next morning, there was a note on my nightstand in his precise handwriting. Had to leave early for business in Boston. Back tomorrow night. Marco has his orders. Take care of yourself and our baby. Our baby. Not your baby, not the baby. Ours. I pressed the note to my chest and let myself hope just for a moment that maybe this arrangement could become something more. That maybe, despite everything, we could build something real from this foundation of contracts and convenience. It was a dangerous hope, the kind that could destroy you if you let it. But as I felt the baby kick again, insistent and alive, I realized I'd already made my choice weeks ago. For better or worse, my future was tied to Alessandro Vittorio's, and somehow, impossibly, that didn't terrify me as much as it should have. The call came at 2 a.m, 6 weeks later. I was deep in sleep, the kind of heavy, dreamless sleep that came in the 3rd trimester. When my phone started vibrating on the nightstand, I fumbled for it in the darkness, my heart already racing because calls at this hour meant emergencies. Hello? My voice was thick with sleep. Mrs. Vittorio. It was Marco, and the tension in his voice snapped me fully awake. I need you to get dressed and pack a bag. Quickly. We need to move you to a secure location. What? Why? Where's Alessandro? Mr. Vittorio there's been an incident. He's alive. Marco added quickly, hearing my sharp intake of breath. But there was an attempt tonight, on his life, and we have intelligence that suggests you may be a target as well. The room spun. I pressed my hand against my stomach. 24 weeks now, the baby growing stronger every day, and tried to breathe. What kind of incident? I can't discuss details over the phone. Please, Mrs. Vittorio, get dressed. 5 minutes. He hung up, and I was moving before I fully processed what was happening. Clothes, phone charger, the medical file my obstetrician had given me in case of emergencies. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip the bag. Marco was at my door in exactly 5 minutes, along with 3 other guards I recognized from the building. Their faces were grim, professional, and that scared me more than anything. Where is he? I demanded as they hustled me toward the private elevator. I want to see Alessandro. He's at a secure facility receiving medical attention, Marco said, his hand firm on my elbow as we descended. He gave explicit orders that you were to be protected first. That's what we're doing. The car was different this time, an SUV with bulletproof glass and a driver who drove like he was fleeing a war zone. We tore through the empty streets of Manhattan, and I watched the city I'd come to know blur past, my heart hammering against my ribs. They took me to a building in Brooklyn, nondescript and industrial looking from the outside. But inside, it was surprisingly comfortable. A safe house, Marco explained, one of several Alessandro maintained throughout the city. "You'll stay here until Mr. Vittorio gives the all-clear," Marco said, doing a sweep of the rooms with practiced efficiency. "There's food in the kitchen, secure phone lines. Don't go near the windows. Don't open the door for anyone except me or someone with the correct passphrase." "What's the passphrase?" I asked, feeling surreal. This couldn't be my life. This couldn't be happening. "Tempest." Marco's expression softened slightly. "It was Mr. Vittorio's mother's favorite word. He said you'd remember it." Tempest, a storm, chaos. Fitting, given the circumstances. Marco left, and I was alone in the safe house with 2 guards stationed outside and a phone that wouldn't tell me anything about Alessandro's condition beyond stable. I paced the living room for hours, my mind conjuring every terrible possibility. Alessandro bleeding, Alessandro dying, Alessandro gone, leaving me and this baby alone in a world that would devour us without his protection. It was dawn when the phone finally rang. "Sophia." His voice was rough, pained, but alive. So beautifully alive. "Alessandro. God, are you okay? What happened? Where are you?" "I'm fine. A few broken ribs, some stitches, nothing permanent." He coughed, and I heard him wince. "There was an ambush tonight, Kozlov, trying to send a message about territory disputes. His men were waiting outside a meeting. They didn't expect me to have backup positioned nearby. You could have died." The words came out strangled. "You could have..." But I didn't. His voice gentled. "I'm fine, Sophia. And you're safe. That's what matters. When can I see you?" Silence. Then, "It's not safe yet. Kozlov is still out there. Still angry. I need to handle this. Permanently. It could take a few days. Maybe a week." "A week?" I pressed my hand against my stomach, feeling the baby's reassuring movement. "Alessandro, I can't." "You can. You're strong. Remember? You'll stay at the safe house, and Marco will keep you updated. I promise I'll come to you as soon as I can." There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Fear, maybe. Or vulnerability. This man who always seemed so controlled, so certain, sounded scared. "Be careful," I whispered. "Please. Whatever you're planning to do, be careful. Always." A pause. "Sophia? The baby. They're okay?" "Yes. Active, actually. Won't stop kicking." I heard something that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Good. That's good. I have to go. But I'll call again soon, I promise." The line went dead, and I was alone again. The week that followed was the longest of my life. Marco brought me updates twice a day. Carefully sanitized versions of what was actually happening out there in Alessandro's world. There had been meetings, negotiations, resolutions to ongoing disputes. The kind of corporate language that meant blood had been spilled, and bodies had been moved, and territories had shifted hands. I tried not to think about it too much, tried not to imagine Alessandro. My Alessandro, the man who'd held my face so gently, who'd felt my baby kick with wonder, doing the terrible things I knew he was capable of. On the 5th day, I woke up to cramping. Not terrible at first, just uncomfortable, like bad period cramps. But they got worse as the morning progressed, coming in waves that made me double over. "Marco!" I called out, and he was there in seconds. "Something's wrong. The baby..." I didn't need to finish. He had his phone out, barking orders in rapid Italian. Within 20 minutes, I was in another car, racing toward Mount Sinai Hospital, with Marco's hand gripping mine and his voice reassuring me that everything would be fine, that Alessandro's personal doctor was already waiting. The hospital was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. They got me into a room, hooked me up to monitors, and I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. My baby's heartbeat, strong and steady. "Braxton Hicks contractions," the doctor said, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, who'd apparently been on Alessandro's payroll for years. "False labor, common in the 3rd trimester, especially under stress, but we want to monitor you for a few hours to be safe." Stress. That was one word for it. I was lying in the hospital bed, watching the monitors track my baby's heartbeat, when the door opened, and Alessandro walked in. He looked terrible. Bruises darkening his jaw, a bandage visible above his collar, moving stiffly like his ribs hurt with every breath. But his eyes, when they found mine, were filled with such raw relief that I started crying. "You're supposed to be handling things," I said through my tears. "Staying away until it's safe." "Fuck safe." He crossed the room and pulled me into his arms, careful of the monitors and IV lines. "Marco called. Said you were in the hospital. Nothing else mattered." I buried my face in his chest, breathing in his scent, cologne and antiseptic and something uniquely him. "I'm okay. The baby's okay. It was just false labor. Just." His arms tightened around me. "You scared 10 years off my life, Sophia." "Good. Now you know how I felt when Marco told me you'd been shot at." He pulled back enough to look at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Something that looked like understanding. "You were worried about me." "Of course I was worried." I hit his chest lightly, mindful of his injuries. "You idiot. You could have died, and I would have been left here alone with our baby and—" I stopped, realizing what I'd said. "I mean, my baby. The baby. Not our baby," Alessandro said firmly. "You said it right the first time. Our baby, Sophia. Mine and yours. Not biologically, maybe, but in every way that matters." The tears came harder now, and I couldn't stop them. "I don't want this to be just business anymore. I don't want to count down the days until the contract ends. I took a shaky breath. "I want this to be real. I want us to be real." Alessandro's hand cupped my face, his thumb brushing away tears. "Sophia, it's been real for me since the moment I saw you sitting in that freezing apartment, reading your eviction notice with tears in your eyes, but your spine still straight. Since you opened the door for me at 5 a.m, even though you were terrified. Since you signed that contract and trusted me to keep my word. But you said, the contract, 1 year, and then I could leave. I gave you an exit, a choice, because you deserved one." His forehead rested against mine. "But God, Sophia, I've been praying every night that you wouldn't take it. That maybe, somehow you'd choose to stay. Choose us." "Us," I whispered, testing the word. It felt right. It felt like coming home. "I love you." The words came out rough, unpracticed, like he'd never said them before, and wasn't sure how they'd be received. "I know I have no right to. I know this started as business and convenience, and maybe a little revenge. But somewhere along the way, you became everything. You and this baby. You're my family. My real family. And I will spend the rest of my life protecting you, providing for you, loving you, if you'll let me." I kissed him. Pulled him down to me despite the monitors and the hospital bed and the doctor who was probably still outside. Kissed him like I'd been wanting to for weeks. Like he was oxygen, and I'd been drowning. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "I love you too," I said. "I think I have for a while. I was just too scared to admit it. Too scared that it wasn't real, that I was just convenient, that—" "You were never convenient," he interrupted. "You were terrifying. You made me feel things I'd locked away after my divorce. You made me hope for things I'd given up on. You made me want to be better, to be the man my mother would have been proud of." The baby kicked then, hard enough that Alessandro felt it against his chest. He looked down in wonder, his hand moving to my stomach. "They know your voice," I said softly. "They always move when you're around." "Smart baby." He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, lighter. "Takes after their mother. What happens now?" I asked, reality creeping back in. "With Kozlov? With all the danger?" Alessandro's expression hardened slightly. "Kozlov is no longer a threat, neither is Carlos. He's been dealt with. The money has been recovered, and certain messages have been sent to anyone else who might consider challenging us. You're safe now, Sophia. Truly safe." I should have asked what dealt with meant. Should have questioned the darkness that flickered across his face, but I was tired of being afraid. Tired of questioning every good thing that happened to me. "Okay," I said simply. "I trust you. Even knowing what I am, what I do. I know you're dangerous. I know you operate in a world I don't fully understand and maybe never will. But I also know you kept every promise you made to me. You protected me. You gave me and this baby a future. My voice cracked. You made me feel safe for the first time in my entire life. So yes, Alessandro, I trust you. He kissed me again, softer this time, reverent. I'm going to marry you again, he murmured against my lips, properly this time. Not a contract, not a business arrangement, a real wedding, with your choice of venue and dress and guests. If you'll have me. I'll have you, I whispered. On one condition. Anything. No more secrets. No more separate bedrooms. No more pretending this is temporary. If we're doing this, really doing this, I want all of you. The good and the bad and everything in between. Deal. He kissed my forehead, my cheeks, my lips. God, Sophia. You have no idea what you've given me, what you've both given me. The doctor chose that moment to return, clearing her throat diplomatically. Well, everything looks good. Baby's heartbeat is strong. Contractions have stopped. I'd like to keep you overnight for observation, but I think you'll both be fine. Both? Alessandro raised an eyebrow. All three of us, doctor. Don't forget about me. She laughed. All three of you, then. I'll give you some privacy. When she left, Alessandro pulled a chair next to my bed and took my hand. Tell me about the nursery. You've been making changes, haven't you? Maria said you had opinions about the color scheme. And just like that, we were talking about normal things, paint colors and baby names and whether we should find out the gender or be surprised. We talked until visiting hours ended, and then Alessandro pulled rank and money and stayed anyway, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside my bed, with his hand never leaving mine. 4 months later, I gave birth to a daughter. Lucia Maria Vittorio came into the world screaming, all 7 pounds and 3 ounces of her, with dark hair and Alessandro's amber eyes, and my nose. She was perfect. Impossibly, miraculously perfect. Alessandro cried when the doctor placed her in his arms. Actually cried, tears streaming down his face as he looked at our daughter with such love, it made my chest ache. Hello, little one, he whispered. I'm your papa, and I promise, I swear on everything I am, that I will protect you and love you for the rest of my life. You and your mother, my girls, my family. Lucia wrapped her tiny hand around his finger, and I watched my husband, my real husband now. We'd remarried 3 months ago in a small ceremony with just his brother and Maria and a few close friends, fall completely, irrevocably in love with a child who wasn't biologically his, but was his in every way that mattered. The next morning, there was a knock on my hospital room door. Marco entered, looking uncomfortable, holding a large envelope. Mrs. Vittorio, he said formally. This arrived for you. It's from Carlos Martinez. The name sent ice through my veins. I'd almost forgotten about Carlos, about the man who'd started this whole chain of events. Alessandro had told me he'd been handled, but I'd assumed that meant paid off, or scared off, or possibly dead. Not writing letters. Alessandro took the envelope before I could, his jaw tight. I'll read it first. No. I held out my hand. I need to see it. Whatever he has to say, I need to know. The letter was short, written in Carlos's familiar handwriting on prison stationery. My hands shook as I read. Sophia, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I was a coward and a liar, and you and our child paid the price for my mistakes. Vittorio found me in the Maldives. He gave me a choice, prison or death. I chose prison. 20 years, minimum security, in exchange for testimony against some of his rivals. It's more mercy than I deserved. I signed away all parental rights to the baby. Vittorio insisted, and I agreed. He'll be a better father than I ever could have been. Better man, too, though that's not saying much. I hope you're happy. I hope the baby is healthy. I hope someday you can forgive me for being too stupid and selfish to see what I had until it was gone. I'm sorry. For everything. Carlos. I read it twice, then handed it to Alessandro without a word. He scanned it quickly, then tore it into precise pieces and threw them in the trash. He doesn't get to do this, Alessandro said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. He doesn't get to ask for your forgiveness or ease his conscience. He had his chance, and he chose to abandon you. I know. I looked at Lucia, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. But I think I'm glad he's alive, that he chose prison instead of running again. And I'm glad he signed away his rights. It makes it real, official. She's ours, Alessandro. Legally, officially ours. She was always ours. He came to sit beside me on the bed, careful of my healing body. From the moment I felt her kick, from the moment I realized I couldn't imagine a future without either of you in it. Your brother was right, you know, I said, leaning into his warmth. That day he came to the penthouse, you do try to save people, fix broken things. Maybe. He pressed a kiss to my temple. But you weren't broken, Sophia. You were bent, maybe. Tested. But never broken. You saved yourself. I just gave you the tools to do it. We saved each other. I corrected. You gave me safety and security. I gave you a reason to hope again, to believe that family could be more than just business and obligation. You gave me everything. His hand covered mine, both of us watching our daughter sleep. My two miracles, my tempest, and my peace. Lucia chose that moment to wake up, her face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. I reached for her, brought her to my chest, and watched as Alessandro's hand automatically went to her tiny head, protective and gentle. This man who commanded empires and inspired fear in hardened criminals was utterly conquered by a newborn baby. "What are you thinking?" I asked, seeing the faraway look in his eyes, that my mother would have loved you both so much. His voice was thick with emotion. That Antonio would have been proud, that somehow, despite everything, despite all my mistakes and sins and the blood on my hands, I ended up with something pure and good and worth protecting with my life. We're not going anywhere, I promised. You're stuck with us, Alessandro Vittorio. For better or worse, forever, forever. He echoed, and it sounded like a vow. I can live with that. 6 months later, we moved out of the Manhattan penthouse and into a house in Westchester, still secure, still carefully protected, but with a yard where Lucia could play someday, a garden where I could grow tomatoes like Alessandro's mother used to. A home, not just a fortress. Matteo became Uncle Matteo, showing up every Sunday for dinner and teaching Lucia Italian lullabies. Maria became Nonna Maria, spoiling her granddaughter shamelessly, and I became simply Sofia Vittorio. Not the poor girl who got pregnant and abandoned, not the convenient replacement wife, but Alessandro's partner, his equal. His love. The contract I'd signed at 5 a.m. in a freezing apartment sat in Alessandro's safe, a reminder of how far we'd come. Sometimes I'd take it out and read it, marveling at how clinical it all seemed, how impossible it was that something born from desperation and revenge and convenience had transformed into this. Into love. Into family. Into forever. On our first anniversary, the real one, from our second wedding, Alessandro woke me before dawn, not with a knock on the door this time, but with his lips on mine and our daughter babbling happily in her crib nearby. "What are you doing?" I mumbled, still half asleep. "It's 5 a.m, he said, his eyes warm with humor and love. "1 year ago, I knocked on your door at this time and changed both our lives. I thought we should celebrate by waking me up at an ungodly hour. By reminding you that every impossible thing that's happened since started with a choice you made, a brave choice, a choice to trust a stranger and take a leap of faith." He pulled me into his arms. "Thank you, Sophia, for opening that door, for signing that contract, for giving me a chance to prove that even men like me can be redeemed by love." I kissed him, tasting coffee and forever on his lips. "Thank you for knocking, for offering me a way out of the darkness, for keeping every promise you made." Lucia started crying, demanding attention, and we both laughed. Alessandro got up to get her, and I watched as he scooped her up, whispering to her in Italian, promising her the world. This was my life now, our life. Built on impossible foundations, yes, started with a contract and desperation and fear, but transformed by choice, by effort, by the decision we made every day to choose each other. The knock at 5 a.m. had turned my life upside down. just like Alessandro promised it would. But I wouldn't change a single moment of it, not one.